The year was 1597, and somewhere in Europe, a wealthy aristocrat was about to make what he believed could be his final meal. On his ornate pewter plate sat a bright red plump tomato, an exotic fruit that had recently arrived from the New World. Little did he know that this seemingly innocent decision would spark one of history's most peculiar food fears, a terror that would grip European society for nearly 3 centuries. The tomato's journey to infamy began long before that fateful dinner. When Spanish conquistadors first encountered these ruby-red fruits in the markets of Tenochtitlan, the Aztec capital, they were mesmerized by their vibrant color and unusual appearance. The Aztecs called them tomatl, and they had been cultivating these fruits for thousands of years without any apparent ill effects. In fact, tomatoes were so integral to Aztec cuisine that they appeared in countless dishes, from simple salsas to complex ceremonial feasts. But when the Spanish brought tomato seeds back to Europe in the early 16th century, something strange began to happen. Within decades of their introduction, whispers started circulating through the cobblestone streets and grand manor houses. Tomatoes were poison. The very fruit that had nourished entire civilizations in the Americas was now being viewed with suspicion and fear by European society. The root of this deadly reputation wasn't entirely unfounded, though the real culprit wasn't the tomato itself. The wealthy elite of Europe, those who could afford the finest pewter plates and lead-glazed ceramics, were indeed falling ill after consuming tomatoes. But the tomato was merely an unwitting accomplice in a much more sinister crime, one perpetrated by their own dining ware. Pewter, the metal of choice for the upper classes, contained high levels of lead. When acidic foods like tomatoes came into contact with these lead-rich surfaces, a chemical reaction occurred that would make any modern food safety inspector break out in a cold sweat. The acid in the tomatoes would leach lead from the plates, creating a toxic cocktail that diners unknowingly consumed with every bite. The symptoms of lead poisoning were both dramatic and terrifying. Wealthy Europeans who indulged in tomatoes began experiencing severe stomach cramps, vomiting, and in extreme cases, death. The connection seemed obvious to observers of the time. Eat tomatoes, get sick, sometimes fatally. What they couldn't see was the invisible lead contamination that was the true villain in this culinary mystery. This toxic relationship between tomatoes and pewter plates created a perfect storm of circumstantial evidence. The wealthy, who were most likely to own lead-containing dinnerware, were also the most likely to experiment with exotic new foods like tomatoes. Meanwhile, the poor who ate from wooden bowls or simple clay dishes rarely experienced these mysterious illnesses when they occasionally managed to get their hands on the expensive imported fruit. The irony was delicious in its own dark way. The very symbol of wealth and status, fine pewter dinnerware, was what made tomatoes deadly for the rich, while the humble eating vessels of the poor kept them safe. But in a society where the experiences and opinions of the wealthy carried far more weight than those of commoners, the narrative that emerged was clear: tomatoes were dangerous, period. Word of these poisonings spread like wildfire through European high society. Dinner party conversations buzzed with tales of mysterious deaths following tomato consumption. Medical texts began documenting cases of tomato poisoning, and physicians started warning their wealthy patients against consuming the treacherous fruit. The tomato's reputation as a killer was becoming firmly established in the collective European consciousness. But the story gets even more fascinating when we consider the botanical classification confusion that added fuel to the fire. Tomatoes belong to the nightshade family Solanaceae, which includes some genuinely deadly plants like belladonna, also known as deadly nightshade. European botanists, already suspicious of this strange New World fruit, noted its family connections with alarm. The nightshade family had long been associated with witchcraft, poison and death in European folklore. Belladonna had been used for centuries as a poison, and its very name meant beautiful woman in Italian, referring to the practice of using diluted extracts to dilate pupils for cosmetic effect, a beauty treatment that sometimes proved fatal. When scholars realized that tomatoes shared genetic lineage with these notorious plants, it seemed to confirm their worst fears. This botanical guilt by association was particularly damning because it provided a scientific-sounding explanation for the mysterious illnesses. If tomatoes were related to deadly nightshade, the reasoning went, then surely they must contain similar toxic compounds. The fact that tomato leaves and stems do contain small amounts of alkaloids like tomatine only seemed to validate these concerns, even though the fruit itself contains negligible amounts of these compounds. The fear wasn't limited to just eating tomatoes either. Some believed that even touching the plants could be dangerous. Gardeners reported developing rashes after handling tomato plants, which we now know was likely due to the natural oils and fine hairs on the stems and leaves, not any deadly poison. But in an era when medical knowledge was limited and superstition ran high, these minor skin irritations were seen as evidence of the plant's malevolent nature. Religious authorities also played a role in cementing the tomato's evil reputation. Some clergy members declared that tomatoes were sinful because they were too beautiful and tempting. Surely they argued anything that looked so appealing must be a temptation from the devil. This moral dimension added another layer to the growing mythology surrounding the forbidden fruit. The situation was further complicated by the fact that tomatoes were initially grown primarily as ornamental plants in Europe. Their bright red color and attractive appearance made them popular decorative additions to gardens. But this ornamental use reinforced the idea that they were meant to be looked at, not eaten. When people did attempt to eat them and subsequently fell ill from lead poisoning, it seemed to confirm that tomatoes were meant for decoration only. Interestingly, the fear of tomatoes wasn't universal across all of Europe. In some Mediterranean regions, particularly in southern Italy and Spain, tomatoes were gradually accepted into local cuisines much earlier than in northern European countries. The warmer climate was more suitable for growing tomatoes, and perhaps more importantly, the dining customs in these regions relied less heavily on pewter plates and more on ceramic or wooden servingware. The class divide in tomato consumption created a fascinating social paradox that would persist for generations. While aristocrats in their grand estates viewed tomatoes with suspicion and fear, peasants and working-class families in certain regions began incorporating them into their daily meals without experiencing the mysterious deaths that plagued the upper classes. This disparity should have been a clue to the real cause of the poisonings, but social prejudices and limited scientific understanding prevented people from connecting the dots. In France, the tomato's reputation was so thoroughly tarnished that it earned the nickname pomme d'amour, or love apple, but not for romantic reasons. The French believed that tomatoes were aphrodisiacs that could drive people to madness and immoral behavior. This belief was partly based on the fruit's resemblance to a human heart and its deep red color, which was associated with passion and blood. French physicians warned that consuming tomatoes could lead to uncontrollable lust and moral corruption, adding yet another layer to the fruit's sinister reputation. The medical establishment of the time was ill-equipped to understand the true cause of tomato-related illnesses. Without knowledge of lead poisoning or the chemical interactions between acidic foods and metal surfaces, doctors could only observe the symptoms and draw conclusions based on limited information. Medical texts from the 16th and 17th centuries are filled with case studies describing tomato fever and nightshade poisoning, complete with detailed descriptions of symptoms that we now recognize as classic signs of lead toxicity. One particularly influential physician, Dr. Pietro Andrea Mattioli, published a widely read botanical guide in 1544 that classified tomatoes as dangerous and potentially lethal. His work, which was translated into multiple languages and distributed throughout Europe, helped cement the scientific consensus against tomato consumption. Mattioli's reputation as a respected botanist and physician gave his warning significant weight, and his classification of tomatoes as toxic influenced medical opinion for centuries. The situation was made worse by the fact that early European tomatoes were often quite different from the varieties we know today. Many of the first tomatoes grown in European gardens were yellow or orange in color, leading to confusion about their identity and properties. Some varieties were indeed more acidic than modern tomatoes, which would have made them more effective at leaching lead from pewter plates. This increased acidity may have contributed to more severe cases of lead poisoning, further reinforcing the belief that tomatoes were inherently dangerous. Botanical gardens across Europe became reluctant to display tomato plants, and when they did, they were often labelled with warnings about their toxic properties. The famous Chelsea Physic Garden in London, established in 1673, initially refused to grow tomatoes at all, citing safety concerns. When they finally did add tomato plants to their collection in the early 18th century, they were placed in a special section reserved for poisonous plants, alongside deadly nightshade and other genuinely toxic species. The fear of tomatoes also extended to their use in folk medicine and witchcraft. Some herbalists claimed that tomato juice could be used as a poison, while others believed that tomato plants grown in graveyards would absorb the essence of death and become even more lethal. These superstitions, while completely unfounded, added to the mystique and fear surrounding the fruit. Interestingly, the tomato's reputation varied significantly depending on how it was prepared and served. Raw tomatoes were considered the most dangerous, while cooked tomatoes were sometimes deemed slightly less risky. This distinction actually had some basis in reality, as cooking tomatoes would have reduced their acidity slightly, potentially decreasing the amount of lead leached from pewter surfaces. However, the difference was minimal, and cooked tomatoes served on lead-containing plates were still quite capable of causing poisoning. The wealthy classes developed elaborate rituals around tomato avoidance. Dinner party hosts would proudly announce that their meals were tomato-free, and guests would compliment the safety and thoughtfulness of such arrangements. Recipe books from the period often included warnings about ingredient substitutions, advising cooks to avoid tomatoes and suggesting alternatives like red peppers or beets for color and flavor. Some enterprising individuals attempted to profit from the tomato fear by selling antidotes and protective charms. Quack doctors peddled expensive remedies that supposedly neutralized tomato poison, while charlatans sold amulets that allegedly protected the wearer from tomato-induced death. These snake oil salesmen found a ready market among the paranoid wealthy who were willing to pay handsomely for peace of mind. The Catholic Church's position on tomatoes was complex and varied by region. While some clergy members condemned tomatoes as sinful temptations, others took a more pragmatic approach. In Italy, where tomatoes eventually became central to the cuisine, some priests argued that God would not have created something so beautiful and nourishing if it were truly evil. This theological debate added another dimension to the tomato controversy, with religious authorities on both sides of the issue. The printing press played a crucial role in spreading tomato fear across Europe. Pamphlets and broadsheets warning of tomato dangers were widely distributed, often featuring dramatic illustrations of people dying after consuming the forbidden fruit. These publications, while sensationalized and inaccurate, were among the first forms of mass media to shape public opinion about food safety. The vivid imagery and alarming headlines captured public attention and helped solidify the tomato's reputation as a killer. Trade routes and commercial interests also influenced the tomato's reputation. Merchants who dealt in other fruits and vegetables sometimes spread rumors about tomato dangers to protect their own markets. Spice traders in particular had an interest in maintaining demand for expensive imported seasonings, rather than allowing people to discover that tomatoes could provide similar flavoring at a fraction of the cost. The scientific method, still in its infancy during this period, was poorly equipped to investigate the tomato mystery. Controlled experiments were rare, and the concept of isolating variables was not well understood. When investigators did attempt to study tomato poisoning, they often failed to account for factors like the type of serving dishes used or the social class of the victims. This led to flawed conclusions that reinforced existing prejudices rather than revealing the truth. Military applications of tomato fear also emerged during various European conflicts. Some armies attempted to use tomatoes as a psychological weapon, spreading rumors that enemy food supplies had been contaminated with tomato poison. While these tactics were generally ineffective, they demonstrated how deeply the fear of tomatoes had penetrated European consciousness. The artistic community was divided on the tomato question. Some painters included tomatoes in their still life works as symbols of danger and temptation, while others avoided depicting them altogether. The red color of tomatoes made them visually striking in paintings, but their association with death and poison gave them a sinister symbolism that many artists found either compelling or repulsive. Educational institutions across Europe incorporated tomato warnings into their curricula, with botany professors teaching students to identify and avoid the dangerous fruit. University medical schools included lectures on tomato poisoning in their toxicology courses, complete with detailed case studies and symptom descriptions. These academic endorsements of tomato danger gave the fear a veneer of scholarly respectability that made it even more difficult to challenge. The legal system also became involved in the tomato controversy. Several European countries considered legislation to ban or restrict tomato cultivation and sale. While most of these laws were never enacted, the mere discussion of legal action against tomatoes demonstrated how seriously the threat was perceived. Some municipalities did pass local ordinances requiring warning labels on tomatoes sold in markets, treating them much like we might treat dangerous chemicals today. International diplomacy was occasionally affected by tomato fears. When European ambassadors traveled to countries where tomatoes were commonly consumed, they sometimes requested special accommodations to ensure their meals were tomato-free. These diplomatic protocols, while seemingly minor, helped spread awareness of European tomatophobia to other parts of the world and sometimes influenced local attitudes toward the fruit. The insurance industry, such as it existed in early modern Europe, began to take notice of tomato-related deaths among the wealthy. Some early insurance policies included clauses that voided coverage if the policyholder died from consuming known poisons, including tomatoes. These contractual provisions provided another form of official recognition for the supposed dangers of tomato consumption. Servants and kitchen staff in wealthy households developed elaborate protocols for handling and disposing of tomatoes. Even though tomatoes were generally avoided, they sometimes appeared in deliveries of mixed produce or were grown accidentally in gardens. Household manuals from the period include detailed instructions for safely removing tomatoes from premises without endangering the staff or family members. The phenomenon of tomato fear created interesting social dynamics within families. Children were taught from an early age to recognize and avoid tomatoes, leading to generations of inherited phobia. Some families developed elaborate stories and cautionary tales about ancestors who had died from tomato consumption, creating family mythologies that reinforced the fear across generations. Medical schools began developing specialized treatments for tomato poisoning, even though they were actually treating lead poisoning without realizing it. These treatments, which included bloodletting, purging, and various herbal remedies, were often more harmful than helpful. The medical establishment's confidence in these treatments, despite their general ineffectiveness, further reinforced the belief that tomato poisoning was a real and serious medical condition. The publishing industry found tomato fear to be a profitable subject. Books about dangerous plants and toxic foods often featured tomatoes prominently with detailed descriptions of their supposed effects. These publications, ranging from serious medical texts to sensationalized popular works, helped maintain public awareness of tomato dangers and provided a steady stream of income for authors and publishers willing to exploit public fears. Gardening practices were significantly influenced by tomatophobia. Many European gardens included special sections for dangerous plants where tomatoes were grown alongside genuinely toxic species like foxglove and hemlock. Garden designers developed elaborate safety measures for these areas, including warning signs, locked gates, and restricted access. The irony of treating nutritious tomatoes with the same caution as deadly poisons was lost on most gardeners of the time. The development of new cooking techniques was sometimes motivated by attempts to make tomatoes safer. Some cooks experimented with extended boiling fermentation and other processes that they believed might neutralize tomato toxins. While these methods didn't actually address the real problem of lead contamination, they occasionally produced interesting culinary innovations that survived long after the tomato fear had faded. Religious festivals and celebrations often included specific prohibitions against tomato consumption. Some Christian denominations declared certain holy days to be tomato-free zones, believing that consuming dangerous foods during sacred times was particularly sinful. These religious restrictions added another layer of social pressure against tomato acceptance and helped maintain the fruit's pariah status. The emerging scientific community was divided on the tomato question. While most established authorities accepted the danger of tomatoes, a few maverick researchers began to question the conventional wisdom. These early skeptics faced significant professional and social pressure, as challenging the tomato orthodoxy was seen as both scientifically irresponsible and socially dangerous. Trade guilds and professional associations sometimes took official positions on tomato safety. The Guild of Physicians in several major cities issued formal warnings against tomato consumption, while agricultural guilds debated whether their members should be allowed to grow the controversial fruit. These professional endorsements of tomato fear carried significant weight in societies where guild membership was essential for economic success. The development of new tableware was influenced by tomato concerns. Some craftsmen began advertising their pewter plates as tomato safe, claiming special alloys or treatments that would prevent poisoning. While these claims were generally false, they demonstrated how market forces were responding to public fears and how the tomato controversy was driving innovation in unexpected areas. Diplomatic gifts between European courts sometimes included elaborate warnings about tomato content. When one royal household sent food gifts to another, they would often include detailed inventories specifying that no tomatoes were included in the shipment. These diplomatic courtesies helped maintain the international reputation of tomato danger and prevented potential embarrassment if a visiting dignitary were to fall ill. The early insurance industry began to develop risk assessment models that included tomato consumption as a factor in determining premiums. Wealthy individuals who were known to eat tomatoes might face higher insurance costs, while those who publicly avoided the fruit could sometimes qualify for discounts. These economic incentives provided additional motivation for tomato avoidance among the upper classes. Theatrical productions of the period sometimes included tomato poisoning as a plot device. Playwrights found that audiences readily accepted tomato-induced deaths as plausible dramatic elements, and the fruit's sinister reputation made it an effective tool for creating tension and fear on stage. These theatrical representations helped reinforce public beliefs about tomato dangers through popular entertainment. The practice of medicine was significantly influenced by the need to treat supposed tomato poisoning. Medical schools developed specialized courses on plant toxicology that focused heavily on tomato-related illnesses. Students learned to recognize the symptoms of tomato poisoning and were trained in various treatment protocols, creating a generation of physicians who were experts in treating a condition that didn't actually exist. All the while in the bustling markets of Naples and the sun-drenched hills of southern Spain, tomatoes were quietly making a name for themselves as culinary stars. Italian peasants unconcerned with aristocratic fears or pewter plates began adding tomatoes to their flatbreads, creating the earliest ancestors of pizza. Spanish cooks tossed tomatoes into stews and sauces, delighting in the tangy flavor and vibrant color. These Mediterranean regions, with their ceramic cookware and practical approach to food, became the unlikely laboratories for tomato acceptance. But back in Northern Europe, the tomato's reputation remained in the gutter. English herbalists wrote with suspicion, warning that the wolf's peach was not to be trifled with. The name itself, wolf's peach, was a nod to the tomato's supposed kinship with the dangerous nightshade family and the old belief that witches could use nightshade to transform into wolves. If that sounds a bit like a fairy tale, well, so did most medical advice in the 1600s. As the Enlightenment dawned and scientific thinking began to take root, a few brave souls started to question the tomato taboo. Some amateur botanists, perhaps emboldened by a rebellious streak or a fondness for garden experiments, decided to taste the forbidden fruit for themselves. These early tomato eaters didn't drop dead on the spot, which caused a few raised eyebrows but didn't immediately overturn centuries of culinary superstition. One of the most famous tomato daredevils was Colonel Robert Gibbon Johnson, an American eccentric with a flair for drama. In 1820, Johnson staged a public spectacle on the steps of the Salem, New Jersey courthouse. Surrounded by a crowd expecting to witness a slow and agonizing death, Johnson calmly ate an entire basket of tomatoes. To everyone's astonishment, he survived. The crowd gasped, the legend grew, and the tomato's reputation in America began to shift from deadly to delicious. Of course, Johnson's tomato-eating stunt didn't immediately erase generations of fear, but it did spark curiosity and conversation, especially as more people noticed that their Italian and Spanish neighbors seemed to be thriving on tomato-based diets. Immigrants from southern Europe brought their culinary traditions with them, and soon tomato sauces, pizzas and stews were popping up in American cities, winning over skeptics one bite at a time. Meanwhile, scientific advances were slowly unraveling the mystery of tomato poisoning. Chemists and physicians began to understand the dangers of lead and the role of acidic foods in leaching toxins from pewter and ceramics. As the true cause of the mysterious illnesses became clear, tomatoes were finally exonerated. The real villain had been hiding in plain sight all along, not the tomato but the dinnerware. With this revelation, the tide began to turn. Tomatoes went from being feared to being fashionable, especially as new varieties with sweeter flavors and less acidity were developed. Gardeners who had once hidden their tomato plants in the poison patch now proudly displayed them front and center. Cookbooks that had once warned against tomatoes began to feature recipes for tomato soup, tomato pie, and even tomato preserves. In an ironic twist, the tomato's former reputation as a dangerous fruit made it all the more alluring to adventurous eaters and trendsetters. What could be more exciting than serving a dish that your great-grandparents would have considered a deadly risk? Tomato-themed dinner parties became the rage among the fashionable set, and tomato recipes were passed around like secret codes. The tomato's journey from feared poison to beloved staple is a testament to the power of myth, the pitfalls of bad science, and the resilience of good food. Today it's hard to imagine a world without tomatoes, no pizza, no ketchup, no spaghetti sauce. Yet for centuries, this humble fruit was at the center of one of history's strangest food panics. Even now, the echoes of tomato fear linger in language and folklore. In some regions, old-timers still refer to tomatoes as love apples or wolf's peaches, a nod to their checkered past. And every so often, a new food panic comes along to remind us that the line between caution and superstition is thinner than we think. So the next time you bite into a juicy tomato, remember the centuries of drama, fear, and misunderstanding that brought it to your plate. And maybe, just maybe, raise a toast to the brave souls who risked everything for a taste of something new. As the 19th century rolled on, tomatoes began to appear more frequently on European tables, but the transition from deadly to delicious was anything but smooth. The tomato's rise was not a straight line. It was a bumpy, winding path full of odd detours, stubborn skeptics, and a few accidental culinary heroes. In England, for example, the tomato's reputation lagged behind its popularity in Mediterranean countries. While the French were still calling it the love apple, and the Germans the paradise apple, British gardeners grew tomatoes mainly for their ornamental value, treating the vibrant red fruit as a kind of botanical dare. Victorian cookbooks, those encyclopedias of household wisdom, often included a few tomato recipes, usually tucked away in the back, as if the editors weren't quite sure whether to trust them. Some recipes began with disclaimers, for those who dare, or if one is so inclined. It was as if the tomato was a slightly scandalous guest at the dinner table, welcome, but watched with suspicion. Meanwhile, across the Atlantic, the United States was undergoing its own tomato revolution, thanks to the spectacle of Colonel Johnson and the influence of Italian immigrants. Tomatoes were gaining ground in American kitchens. By the mid-1800s, tomato ketchup was a common condiment, and canned tomatoes were becoming a pantry staple. But even here, the shadow of tomato fear lingered. Some advertisements for tomato products emphasized their safety, boasting of pure, wholesome tomatoes guaranteed non-poisonous. Nothing says, "Trust me," like a label that promises not to kill you. The science of food safety was advancing, albeit slowly. Chemists began to analyze the composition of tomatoes, searching for the toxins that so many believed were lurking inside. What they found instead was a nutritional powerhouse. Tomatoes are rich in vitamin C, potassium, and the antioxidant lycopene. Instead of a deadly poison, the tomato turned out to be a health food in disguise. This discovery did wonders for the tomato's image, and soon doctors were recommending tomatoes as a cure for everything from scurvy to indigestion. But old habits die hard. In some rural areas, stories persisted about the dangers of eating tomatoes at the wrong time of year, or about the mysterious illnesses that supposedly struck down tomato lovers. Superstitions lingered, passed down from generation to generation, often taking on new forms. In some places it was said that eating tomatoes would make your blood too hot, or that it would cause madness in those with a nervous temperament. Tomato-based madness never quite caught on as a medical diagnosis, but it made for some excellent dinner conversation. Meanwhile, the tomato was quietly conquering the world. Italian cuisine, with its love of tomatoes, was spreading across Europe and the Americas. Pizza, pasta and tomato sauce became international sensations, winning over even the most skeptical palates. The tomato's journey from feared fruit to culinary superstar was nearly complete, but there were still a few hurdles to clear. One of the last holdouts was the British upper class, who clung to their tomato suspicions well into the late 19th century. Some aristocrats refused to eat tomatoes in public, fearing social embarrassment or ridicule. Others insisted on elaborate rituals to purify tomatoes before eating them, such as soaking them in vinegar or boiling them for hours. These rituals did little to change the tomato's flavor, but they provided a sense of security for those who still harbored doubts. The tomato's reputation finally received a major boost from the world of science and medicine. As researchers continued to study the fruit, they discovered that not only was it safe to eat, but it was also beneficial for health. The discovery of vitamins and the growing understanding of nutrition helped to dispel the last vestiges of tomato fear. By the early 20th century, tomatoes were being promoted as a superfood, and their popularity soared. The rise of mass media also played a role in rehabilitating the tomato's image. Newspapers and magazines published articles extolling the virtues of tomatoes, and celebrity chefs began to feature tomato-based recipes in their cookbooks. The tomato, once shunned and feared, was now a symbol of modernity and good health. But perhaps the most powerful force in the tomato's redemption was simple human curiosity. As more people traveled, tasted new foods and shared their experiences, the old myths about tomatoes began to fade. The spread of Italian restaurants, the popularity of pizza, and the global fascination with Mediterranean cuisine all helped to cement the tomato's place in the culinary pantheon. Of course, the story of the tomato is not just about fear and redemption, it's also about adaptation and innovation. Over the centuries, farmers and gardeners have developed hundreds of tomato varieties, each with its own unique flavor, color and texture. From tiny cherry tomatoes to giant beefsteaks, from yellow and orange to deep purple and even striped. The diversity of tomatoes is a testament to human ingenuity and the enduring appeal of this once maligned fruit. And yet, every so often, a new tomato panic emerges. In the 21st century, concerns about genetically modified tomatoes, pesticide residues and food safety scandals have sparked fresh waves of anxiety. But these modern fears are a far cry from the superstitions of the past. Today we have science regulation and a global network of food experts to guide us. The tomato may still inspire debate, but it's no longer seen as an agent of death. In fact, the tomato has become a symbol of resilience and transformation. Its journey from feared poison to beloved staple is a reminder that our relationship with food is shaped as much by culture and tradition as by science and fact. The next time you enjoy a slice of pizza or a bowl of tomato soup, remember the centuries of drama, doubt and discovery that made it possible. And if you ever find yourself at a dinner party where someone questions the safety of tomatoes, you'll have a treasure trove of fun facts and historical tidbits to share. You can regale your fellow diners with tales of pewter plates, botanical confusion, and the brave souls who risked everything for a taste of the forbidden fruit. Who knows? You might even inspire a new appreciation for the humble tomato, and maybe, just maybe, help put the last nail in the coffin of tomato fear. Let's not forget the tomato's role in art, literature, and pop culture. From Renaissance paintings that hinted at its dangerous allure to modern movies that celebrate its culinary versatility. The tomato has always been more than just a food. It's a symbol, a story, and a source of endless fascination. Whether you see it as a love apple, a wolf's peach, or simply a delicious addition to your salad, the tomato's journey is a testament to the power of myth, the importance of curiosity, and the enduring joy of discovery. As the 20th century dawned, The tomato's image was finally on the mend. The fruit that had once been whispered about in fearful tones was now being celebrated in cookbooks, advertised in magazines, and even grown in backyard gardens from London to New York. But the tomato's journey was far from over. It was about to become a global superstar, and its story was about to get even juicier. The invention of canning in the 19th century had already begun to change the way people thought about tomatoes. Suddenly, tomatoes could be preserved at the peak of ripeness and enjoyed year-round, no matter the season. Canned tomatoes became a pantry staple, and recipes for tomato soup, stews, and sauces spread rapidly. The famous Campbell's tomato soup, introduced in 1897, became a household name and a symbol of American comfort food. The red and white can was immortalized by Andy Warhol in his pop art, proving that tomatoes had finally achieved cultural icon status. Meanwhile, Italian immigrants in the United States and elsewhere were busy spreading the gospel of tomatoes. Their love for tomato sauce pizza and pasta with marinara was infectious. Soon, tomato-based dishes were appearing in restaurants and home kitchens across the country. Spaghetti with tomato sauce became the ultimate comfort food, and pizza parlors popped up in every major city. The tomato had gone from feared foreigner to beloved family member in just a few generations. But the tomato's rise to fame wasn't just about food. Scientists were still fascinated by this once maligned fruit. In the early 20th century, plant breeders began experimenting with cross-pollination, creating new varieties that were sweeter, juicier, and more resistant to disease. The tomato became a favorite subject for genetic research, and by the 1930s, hybrid tomatoes were all the rage. The quest for the perfect tomato, firm yet juicy, sweet yet tangy, became a national pastime for gardeners and farmers alike. World War II gave the tomato another boost. As part of the Victory Garden movement, families were encouraged to grow their own fruits and vegetables, including tomatoes, to support the war effort. The sight of neat rows of tomato plants in suburban backyards became a symbol of patriotism and self-sufficiency. Children learned to care for their tomato plants, and soon everyone had a favorite recipe for tomato salad, tomato sandwiches, or that classic American invention, the BLT. By the 1950s, tomatoes were everywhere. Supermarkets stocked fresh canned and even frozen tomatoes. Ketchup became America's favorite condiment, slathered on burgers, fries, and just about everything else. The tomato's transformation was complete. It was no longer a symbol of danger and death, but of abundance, health, and home-cooked goodness. Yet even as the tomato basked in its newfound glory, a few reminders of its checkered past lingered. Every so often, a well-meaning relative would warn against eating too many tomatoes, or a vintage cookbook would surface with a note about moderation. But these were now quaint relics of a bygone era, more likely to inspire amusement than anxiety. In the rest of the world, the tomato's journey took on new twists. In Asia, tomatoes were embraced in stir-fries, soups, and salads. In the Middle East, they became the star of shakshuka and tabbouleh. In Africa, tomatoes found their way into stews and sauces, adding color and flavor to traditional dishes. The tomato was now a citizen of the world, loved and celebrated in every cuisine. Of course, the tomato's global takeover wasn't without its challenges. In some places, traditionalists resisted the new fruit, insisting that local dishes were better without it. But the tomato's versatility proved irresistible. It could be roasted, grilled, stewed, dried, or eaten fresh. It paired well with cheese, herbs, meats, and grains. It was as comfortable in a humble peasant stew as it was in a gourmet restaurant. The tomato also became a symbol of cultural exchange and adaptation. In India, for example, tomatoes were quickly incorporated into curries and chutneys, blending seamlessly with local spices. In China, tomatoes found a home in both sweet and savory dishes, from scrambled eggs with tomato to tomato-based hot pots. The fruit's ability to adapt to new environments and cuisines was nothing short of remarkable. But the tomato's story isn't just about food and flavor. It's also about science, technology, and the ever-evolving relationship between humans and nature. In the late 20th and early 21st centuries, the tomato became a focus of genetic engineering and biotechnology. Scientists sequenced the tomato genome, hoping to unlock the secrets of flavor, nutrition, and disease resistance. The result was a dizzying array of new tomato varieties, each promising to be redder, juicier, or more nutritious than the last. Of course, not everyone was thrilled with these developments. The debate over genetically modified tomatoes sparked new controversies, with some people worrying about the safety and ethics of tampering with nature. But compared to the superstitions of the past, these modern debates were grounded in science and evidence, not fear and folklore. The tomato also became a symbol in the fight against food waste and for sustainable agriculture. Chefs and activists championed ugly tomatoes, arguing that flavor mattered more than appearance. Farmers' markets and community gardens celebrated heirloom varieties, preserving the rich diversity of tomato shapes, sizes, and colors. The tomato, once shunned and feared, was now a symbol of resilience, adaptability, and the joy of eating well. And yet, for all its modern triumphs, the tomato's past is never far away. Every summer, as tomatoes ripen on the vine, gardeners swap stories about the best varieties, the sweetest fruits, and the most flavorful sauces. Food historians dig up old recipes and tales of tomato fear, reminding us that even the most beloved foods can have a rocky start. So the next time you slice into a ripe tomato, whether for a salad, a sandwich, or a sauce, take a moment to appreciate the long and winding road that brought it to your plate. From Aztec markets to European banquets, from colonial gardens to global supermarkets, the tomato's journey is a story of curiosity, courage, and culinary creativity. And if you ever hear someone say that tomatoes are dangerous, you can smile and share the real story, a story full of science, superstition, and a whole lot of flavor. Because if history teaches us anything, it's that the things we fear today might just become the things we love tomorrow. Even with the tomato's redemption firmly established, the fruit never lost its flair for drama. In fact, the tomato became the star of some of the world's most joyful and occasionally messy celebrations. Take Spain's La Tomatina festival, for example, a raucous annual food fight where tens of thousands of people hurl overripe tomatoes at each other in the streets of Buñol. What started as a local prank in the 1940s blossomed into an international spectacle, proving that the tomato could inspire not just fear or culinary passion, but pure, squishy fun. Elsewhere, the tomato's legacy is honored in quieter ways. In the United States, towns from Arkansas to Ohio host tomato festivals, complete with tastings, recipe contests, and the crowning of tomato queens. These events celebrate not only the fruit's flavor, but its journey from outcast to icon. The humble tomato, once banished from the table, now gets its own parades and pageants. Meanwhile, in kitchens around the world, the tomato continues to surprise and delight. Chefs experiment with new combinations: tomato sorbet, tomato jam, even tomato cocktails. Home cooks pass down secret family recipes for tomato sauce, each one a little different, each one fiercely defended as the best. The tomato's versatility is its superpower. It can be the star of a dish, or a supporting player, raw, or cooked sweet or savory. But the tomato story is also a reminder of how quickly food fashions can change. Not so long ago, kale was just a garnish and sushi was considered exotic. Today, both are everyday fare, while other foods, think aspic or liverwurst, have faded from the spotlight. The tomato's journey from feared to fashionable is a lesson in keeping an open mind and an open mouth. Of course, the tomato's transformation didn't happen in isolation. It was shaped by explorers, traders, scientists, cooks, and countless ordinary people willing to try something new. The story of the tomato is really the story of human curiosity, our willingness to question old beliefs, to experiment, and to embrace the unfamiliar. And let's not forget the role of happy accidents. If pewter plates hadn't been so popular among the European elite, maybe the tomato wouldn't have gotten such a bad rap. If Italian peasants hadn't been so practical and hungry, maybe pizza would never have been born. If a certain colonel in New Jersey hadn't staged a tomato-eating spectacle, maybe Americans would still be eyeing tomatoes with suspicion. History is full of twists, turns, and tomato stains. Today, the tomato is so common that it's easy to forget how extraordinary it really is. It's one of the few foods that can be found in nearly every cuisine on every continent. It's a staple in salads, sauces, soups, and sandwiches. It's the base for ketchup, the topping for pizza, and the secret ingredient in countless family recipes. The tomato is proof But the things we fear or misunderstand can, with time and a little luck, become the things we cherish most. And yet, the tomato's story is still being written. New varieties are developed every year, each promising better flavor, more nutrients, or greater resistance to pests. Scientists continue to study the tomato's genetics, hoping to unlock secrets that could help feed a growing world. Chefs dream up new ways to showcase its flavor, while gardeners compete to grow the biggest, juiciest specimens. The tomato's future is as bright as its past is colorful. So, if you're ever feeling hesitant about trying a new food, remember the tomato. Remember how it went from villain to hero, from deadly to delicious. Remember the centuries of suspicion, the moments of bravery, and the ultimate triumph of taste. And then take a bite. Who knows, you might just discover your new favorite flavor. And if you ever find yourself in Buñol during La Tomatina, don't forget to bring goggles. The tomato may no longer be deadly, but it can still pack a punch, especially when thrown at high speed by a tomato-loving stranger. If you think the tomato story is just about food, think again. The tomato has also made its mark in the world of science, politics, and even space exploration. That's right, this once feared fruit has traveled farther than most of us ever will, and not just on the dinner table. Let's start with science. The tomato is a favorite subject for botanists and geneticists, partly because it's easy to grow, and partly because it's so wonderfully variable. There are thousands of tomato varieties, from tiny currant tomatoes, no bigger than a marble, to beefsteaks that can tip the scales at over a kilogram. Scientists have mapped the tomato genome, unlocking clues about disease resistance, ripening, and flavor. The tomato is now a model organism for plant research, right up there with the mighty Arabidopsis, which, let's be honest, is nowhere near as tasty. But the tomato's influence doesn't stop at the lab bench. It's also played a role in international politics. During the Cold War, American ketchup, yes, really became a symbol of Western culture, exported around the globe as a taste of American life. Meanwhile, in the Soviet Union, tomato paste was a pantry staple used to stretch soups and stews during lean times. The tomato became a quiet ambassador, crossing borders and bridging cultures one sauce at a time. And then there's the tomato in space. In the 1980s and 1990s, NASA launched experiments to see how tomatoes would grow in microgravity. Astronauts aboard the Space Shuttle and the International Space Station have grown and eaten tomatoes, proving that even in the most extreme environments, the tomato can thrive. School children around the world have participated in Tomatosphere, a project where they grow seeds that have been to space, comparing their growth to earthbound tomatoes. The results: tomatoes are tough, adaptable, and apparently not afraid of heights. Back on Earth, the tomato continues to inspire creativity. Artists use tomatoes as subjects for still lifes, capturing their glossy sheen and vibrant color. Musicians write songs about tomatoes, and writers use them as metaphors for everything from love to revolution. The phrase "throwing tomatoes" has become shorthand for audience disapproval, a tradition dating back to the days when theatergoers would pelt bad performers with whatever was handy, often the humble tomato. But perhaps the greatest legacy of the tomato is its ability to bring people together. Whether it's a family gathered around a pot of simmering sauce, friends sharing a pizza, or strangers laughing in a tomato-throwing festival, the tomato is a catalyst for connection. It's a reminder that food is more than just fuel, it's a source of joy, comfort, and community. Of course, the tomato's journey hasn't been without its bumps. There are still tomato controversies, heated debates over the best way to make sauce or whether tomatoes belong in chili. Texans say no, Cincinnati says yes. There are tomato purists who insist on heirloom varieties and tomato rebels who embrace hybrids. There are even tomato truthers who claim that supermarket tomatoes have lost their flavor, and let's be honest, sometimes they have a point. Yet despite these squabbles, the tomato endures. It adapts, evolves, and keeps finding new ways to surprise us. It's a fruit that's been feared, forbidden, celebrated, and sometimes even weaponized, but it's never been boring. So next time you see a tomato, whether it's perched on a salad bubbling in a sauce or flying through the air at a festival, take a moment to appreciate its journey. From Aztec gardens to European banquets, from scientific labs to outer space, the tomato has traveled a long and winding road. It's a story of misunderstanding and redemption, of science and superstition, of flavor and fun. And if you're ever in doubt about trying something new, just remember the tomato. If it can go from deadly to delicious, from outlaw to icon, then anything is possible. The tomato's ability to reinvent itself doesn't stop at the edge of the plate. In the world of health and nutrition, it's become a poster child for eating the rainbow. Nutritionists praise tomatoes for their lycopene, a powerful antioxidant that gives them their red color and is linked to heart health and cancer prevention. Suddenly, the fruit once thought to be deadly was being recommended by doctors and dietitians everywhere. Imagine telling a 17th century noble that eating more tomatoes might help them live longer. But the tomato's health halo comes with its own set of quirks. There are endless debates about whether cooked or raw tomatoes are better for you. Spoiler, both have their benefits. Some people swear by tomato juice as a hangover cure, while others insist that a slice of raw tomato can soothe a sunburn. The internet is full of tomato hacks, from using them as natural face masks to polishing copper pots. Whether or not these work is beside the point. The tomato's reputation has come full circle, from feared poison to miracle cure. Of course, not every tomato tale is a happy one. The rise of industrial agriculture brought new challenges. To meet the demands of supermarkets, tomatoes were bred for durability and uniformity, sometimes at the expense of flavor. The cardboard tomato became a running joke, and foodies everywhere began searching for the taste of the tomatoes they remembered from childhood. This sparked the heirloom tomato craze as gardeners and chefs sought out old varieties with wild shapes, colors, and most importantly, flavor. Farmers' markets and community gardens became battlegrounds for tomato bragging rights. Who could grow the biggest, juiciest, or weirdest-looking tomato tastings became a summer ritual, with fans swooning over the differences between Brandywine Cherokee Purple and Green Zebra. The tomato, once shunned for its supposed dangers, was now the darling of the local food movement. And just when you thought the tomato couldn't get any more interesting, it found itself at the center of legal and linguistic debates. Is it a fruit or a vegetable? Botanically, it's a fruit, since it develops from the flower and contains seeds. But in 1893, the United States Supreme Court ruled that for tax purposes, the tomato should be considered a vegetable, since it's usually served with the main part of the meal. This deliciously silly legal twist only added to the tomato's mystique. The tomato has also become a symbol of protest and political expression. In some countries, throwing tomatoes is a time-honored way to show displeasure with politicians or performers. The act is both comic and cathartic, a way to turn a symbol of past fear into a tool for present-day fun and maybe a little mischief. Meanwhile, the tomato's popularity shows no sign of slowing down. New recipes and trends pop up every year. Sun-dried tomatoes, tomato, confit tomato water, tomato desserts. There are tomato-based cocktails, from the classic Bloody Mary to creative concoctions involving basil and balsamic. The tomato even has its own emoji, a tiny red badge of honor in the digital age. And let's not forget the tomato's role in family life. For many people, the first taste of a sun-warmed tomato fresh from the garden is a rite of passage. Children learn to plant water and watch their tomatoes grow, marveling at the transformation from tiny seed to plump red fruit. Grandparents pass down stories and recipes, keeping the tomato's legacy alive for another generation. Even in the world of art and literature, the tomato continues to inspire. Poets compare love to ripe tomatoes, painters capture the glossy sheen of tomato skins, and novelists use the tomato as a symbol of hope, change, or nostalgia. The tomato's journey from feared outsider to beloved staple is a story that resonates far beyond the kitchen. So as you drift off to sleep, let your mind wander through the tomato's history, a tale of adventure, misunderstanding, and ultimate triumph. Picture the Aztec markets, the grand European banquets, the bustling American diners, and the sunlit gardens where tomatoes grow in wild profusion. Imagine the laughter of La Tomatina, the quiet pride of a gardener's first harvest, and the simple joy of biting into a perfect juicy tomato. And if you ever wake up in the middle of the night hungry for a midnight snack, you'll know exactly what to reach for. Just remember, it wasn't always this easy. The tomato's journey was long, winding, and full of surprises, a delicious reminder that sometimes the things we fear most turn out to be the sweetest of all. And so, as the tomato's story winds down for the night, it leaves us with one last, gentle lesson. History is rarely as simple as it seems. The tomato, with its bright red skin and juicy heart, was once the villain of the dinner table, blamed for deaths it never caused, shunned by the wealthy, and whispered about in the shadowy corners of old kitchens. Yet with time, curiosity, and a little scientific sleuthing, it became a hero, a symbol of health, flavor, and togetherness. Imagine all the people over the centuries who watched the tomato's transformation. The Aztec farmers who first cultivated it, marveling at its color and taste. The Spanish explorers who brought it across the ocean, unsure whether it was treasure or trouble. The European aristocrats who eyed it with suspicion, and the peasants who quietly enjoyed it anyway. The scientists who finally cracked the case, and the chefs who turned it into a global superstar. Now the tomato is everywhere. It's in your salad, your sandwich, your pasta, your pizza. It's in the ketchup bottle at every diner, the sauce on your fries, the juice in your Bloody Mary. It's in the backyard garden, the supermarket, the farmer's market, and the pages of recipe books handed down through generations. It's even in outer space, floating in zero gravity, proving that no matter how far we go, we take our favorite foods with us. But perhaps the best part of the tomato's story is how it brings people together. Every time you share a meal with tomatoes, whether it's a family dinner, a picnic with friends, or a festival in the streets, you're part of a tradition that stretches back centuries. You're connected to all those who came before, who feared, questioned, and finally embraced this remarkable fruit. So the next time you see a tomato, give it a little nod of respect. Remember that it survived centuries of suspicion, outlasted bad science and wild rumors, and still ended up the star of the show. It's a reminder that sometimes the things we misunderstand most have the most to offer us. All it takes is a little patience, a little courage, and a willingness to taste something new. And as you drift off to sleep, let the story of the tomato remind you the world is full of surprises, and every meal is a chance for discovery. Who knows what other forbidden fruits are waiting to become tomorrow's favorites? For now, rest easy, knowing that the tomato, once deadly, now delicious, will be there for you in the morning, ready to brighten your breakfast, lunch, or dinner. Sweet dreams, and may your dreams be as colorful and unexpected as the journey of the humble tomato.